The richest man in the restaurant looked me in the eyes and told me I would always be just a waitress. Everyone laughed. 3 days later, he walked into my office asking for a deal. My name is Sophie Bennett. I am 24 years old, and on the night this all began, I was carrying a tray of champagne glasses across the marble floor of Lucent, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, wearing a black apron over a white blouse, my dark hair pulled back into the same neat ponytail I wear every shift. I should tell you something about myself before I go any further, because it matters for everything that comes after. I am by nature a very calm person. I don't raise my voice. I don't argue with difficult customers, even when they deserve it. I smile, I nod, I do my job well, and I let most things simply pass through me like weather. My mother used to say I had an old soul. Think mostly I just learned early that calm gets you further than anger ever does. That calm was tested more than usual on a Thursday evening in early spring at table 14 by a man named Alexander Reed. I didn't know who he was when I first approached his table, not really. I recognized the name vaguely, the way you recognize the names of people who show up in headlines you scroll past without reading. Billionaire. Tech founder. Kind of man whose net worth gets attached to his name like a title. Alexander Reed, worth $11 billion, as though the number were part of his identity now, inseparable from the rest of him. He was 48 years old, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than a year of my rent, and he was, from the moment I approached, dissatisfied with everything. The wine was wrong, too warm, he said, though I'd poured it at exactly the temperature the sommelier specified. The bread was stale, though it had come out of the oven 20 minutes earlier. The table itself wasn't to his liking. He wanted to be moved somewhere with a better view, and when I explained politely that the table he wanted was already reserved for another party, he looked at me the way you might look at an inconvenient object blocking your path. Then unreserve it, he said. I smiled, the same smile I give everyone, the one that costs me nothing, and I explained as gently as I could that I wasn't able to do that. He didn't respond. He simply turned back to the 3 men dining with him and continued his conversation as though I'd already left the table, though I hadn't yet. I have learned over the years that some people don't actually want a solution to their complaint. They want to feel the friction of complaining, and they want someone standing there to absorb it. I have gotten good at being that person. It is, strangely, one of the more useful skills I've ever developed. By the time dessert came around, Alexander Reed had found something wrong with nearly every course. The steak was overcooked, though his companions ate theirs without comment. The service, he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, was unacceptable for a restaurant charging these prices. I apologized each time sincerely and offered to fix whatever I could. Most of it there was nothing to fix. He simply wanted to be heard complaining. When he finally stood to leave, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a small handful of bills and dropped them onto the table without counting them, without looking at me, the gesture itself designed to communicate exactly how little thought he'd given it. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, for what might have been the first time all evening, and he said the words that would follow me around for the rest of that week. Know your place. The restaurant wasn't loud in that moment. It should have been, given how busy it was, but there's a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when someone says something cruel in public, a silence built from other people's discomfort, other people's relief that it isn't happening to them. I heard a few quiet laughs from a nearby table, not directed at him exactly, but not directed away from the moment either. Kind of laughter people offer when they don't know what else to do with second-hand embarrassment. I didn't argue with him. I never do. I simply smiled the way I always smile and said, "Have a good evening, sir." He left without looking back. I picked up the bills he'd dropped, cleared the table, and finished my shift like it was any other night because to everyone in that restaurant it was. What none of them knew, what Alexander Reed certainly didn't know, was exactly how temporary my place in that restaurant actually was. I need to explain something now, something I hadn't told a single person at Lucent during my 3 weeks there, not the other servers, not the manager who scheduled my shifts, not even the bartender I'd become friendly with over quiet Tuesday nights. My family runs an investment fund. A large one, the kind that manages hundreds of millions of dollars, the kind whose name appears in the same headlines as men like Alexander Reed, usually attached to deals worth staggering sums of money. I am being trained slowly and deliberately to eventually help run it. But my family has a tradition, one my grandfather started decades ago and that my mother has carried on with a stubbornness I've come to deeply respect. Every future leader of the fund, every single one of us, no exceptions, regardless of how many degrees we hold or how much money already sits in our names, spends 3 weeks working in the service industry before we're allowed to take a real position within the company. Waiting tables, serving coffee, standing on our feet for 8 or 10 hours at a stretch, absorbing complaints from people who have no idea who we actually are. My grandfather used to say that you cannot understand how to invest in people in companies in the future until you understand how people treat someone who appears to have no power. He said character isn't revealed in boardrooms. It's revealed at tables like the one Alexander Reed sat at that Thursday night, when he thought the woman pouring his wine was someone whose feelings didn't matter enough to consider. I had 11 days left in my 3 weeks when he called me a waitress and told me to know my place. I finished the assignment without telling anyone who I was. That was the whole point. I remember thinking that night on the subway ride home, still in my apron, my feet aching in a way that no amount of expensive shoes back at my apartment could have prevented, that this was exactly the kind of moment my grandfather had built the tradition around. Not the small kindnesses, those are easy to notice, easy to perform even when they aren't sincere. It was the cruelty that mattered. The moments when someone believed they were speaking into a void, when they assumed the person across from them had no future, no name, no consequence attached to their existence at all. I thought about the other servers I'd worked alongside for those 3 weeks, Marcus, who was putting himself through nursing school on tips and exhaustion, Priya, who sent half her paycheck home to her parents every month without complaint, Danny, who'd worked at Lucent for 11 years and could recite the entire wine list from memory but had never once been asked his opinion on anything beyond a pairing. None of them had a family fund waiting for them on the 40th floor of some glass building downtown. None of them had the luxury of an exit date circled on a calendar. They simply worked, day after day, absorbing whatever the evening handed them, and going home to lives the customers upstairs never once wondered about. I understood, in a way I hadn't fully understood before that assignment, why my grandfather insisted on this. It would have been easy for me to read about service work in a report, to nod sympathetically at statistics about tip theft or scheduling instability, and to feel from a comfortable distance that I understood something about the people my fund's decisions would eventually affect. But understanding from a distance and understanding from inside an apron are not the same thing. They were never meant to be the same thing. 3 days after that night, I sat down at the head of a long conference table on the 40th floor of my family's building, wearing a charcoal suit instead of a black apron, a folder in front of me containing the full details of a deal worth several $100 million. Alexander Reed's company was in trouble. I'd read the reports carefully over the previous 2 days. A product launch that had underperformed badly, a wave of departures among senior engineers, investors growing nervous, competitors circling. He needed capital, and he needed it urgently, or a deal he'd spent over a year building toward would collapse entirely, taking a significant portion of his company's value down with it. My fund was one of the last serious options left on his list. I heard him before I saw him. His voice in the hallway, confident, a little impatient, the voice of a man who was used to being the most important person walking into any room. Then the door opened and he stepped inside, and his eyes moved across the table the way they always did, cataloging, assessing, deciding almost instantly who in the room deserved his attention. His eyes reached me last. I watched something shift behind them. A flicker of recognition, then confusion, then a kind of dawning, uncomfortable certainty as the pieces assembled themselves in his mind. Ponytail was gone, replaced by hair worn loose around my shoulders. The apron was gone, replaced by a suit tailored precisely to fit. But my face hadn't changed at all. For the first time since I'd met him, Alexander Reed didn't have anything to say. I let the silence sit there longer than I probably needed to. Not out of cruelty, I want to be clear about that, but because some moments deserve their full weight before anyone rushes to fill them with words. Mr. Reed, I finally said, gesturing toward the empty chair across from me. Please sit down. He sat. Slowly. Confidence that had walked through the door with him had visibly drained out somewhere between the hallway and the chair, and what remained looked, for the first time since I'd met him, almost human. You, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Sophie Bennett, I said, extending my hand across the table, professional, calm, exactly the way I would greet any other client. I run diligence and early-stage evaluation for the fund. It's good to formally meet you. He shook my hand. His grip was noticeably less certain than it had been 3 nights earlier, when he dropped a handful of bills on a table without bothering to count them. We went through the numbers first, the terms of the deal, the state of his company, the risks my team had flagged in our review. He answered my questions carefully, professionally, clearly trying very hard to be a different man in that room than the one I'd served dinner to. I gave him that. I answered every question fairly, gave every figure its due weight, treated the deal itself with exactly the seriousness it deserved, independent of anything that had happened at Lucent. But near the end of the meeting, after the numbers had been laid out and the terms discussed, he set down his pen and something in his posture softened. Ms. Bennett, he said, before we go further, I want to say something. About the restaurant. I waited. He paused, choosing his words with visible effort. I was not in a good place that week. The launch had failed. I was under enormous pressure. That's not an excuse, I know that, but I want you to know I don't normally. Mr. Reed, I said, gently but without softening the point, your character isn't revealed on your best days. He stopped talking. It's revealed on the days when you think no one who matters is watching, I continued. That night, you thought you were speaking to someone whose opinion of you would never affect anything you cared about. That tells me exactly who you are when you believe there's nothing at stake. He didn't argue. To his credit, he didn't try to talk his way out of it, didn't offer more excuses, didn't do what I half expected him to do and remind me who he was, how much power he still held, how many other funds would be thrilled to have this meeting instead of mine. He simply sat there, absorbing it the way I imagine very few people had ever made him absorb anything in a very long time. I closed the folder in front of me. I've reviewed the deal thoroughly, I said, standing. I don't believe the fund will be moving forward. The numbers are strong, he said quietly. It wasn't quite an argument. Sounded more like a man testing whether there was still a door open somewhere. The numbers are strong, I agreed. But my grandfather built this fund on a principle I still believe in completely. We don't just invest in companies. We invest in the people who run them. And I already know exactly how you treat people you believe have no power over you. I paused at the door. I'm not willing to bet several $100 million that you'll treat the people inside your own company any differently. I didn't say it with anger. I want that understood clearly. There was no triumph in my voice, no satisfaction at watching a powerful man realize, 3 days too late, exactly who he'd dismissed at table 14. I said it the way I say most things, calmly, plainly, because it was true and because the truth didn't need decoration to land. He didn't call after me as I left. I don't think there was anything left for him to say. The deal fell apart within the week, not entirely because of our decision, though I heard later that our withdrawal had triggered a wave of hesitation among the other investors who'd been watching to see which way we'd lean. Alexander Reed's company survived eventually through other means, smaller and humbler than it had been before. I don't know if the experience changed him. I've thought about that more than I probably should. I hope it did. I genuinely do. I don't carry cruelty well, even toward people who've earned a little of it. But I think about that night at Lucent often, the silence that fell over the restaurant, the quiet laughter from a nearby table, the ease with which a powerful man dismissed a woman he assumed could do nothing to affect his life. I think about how confidently people reveal themselves when they believe no consequence is watching. I still work in that same building on the 40th floor. I still greet the coffee cart woman by name every morning, still remember the names of the security guards, still tip generously and thank people sincerely wherever I go, because 3 weeks in an apron taught me something my grandfather already knew and had simply been waiting for me to learn myself. The way you treat someone who can do nothing for you is the truest measure of who you actually are. Sometimes I think about how differently that Thursday night might have gone if Alexander Reed had simply been kind. Not extraordinary, not warm, just ordinarily decent, the way most people manage to be even on their worst days. I wonder if he ever thinks about it too, whether the memory surfaces for him the way certain memories do, uninvited in quiet moments when he least expects them. I hope in some small way it changed something in him. Not because I need it to, but because I'd rather live in a world where lessons like that actually take root, instead of simply becoming stories people tell to explain what they lost. Respect isn't something you give to powerful people. Something you give to everyone. Would you have forgiven him?